Hi guys, sorry for the late video. Here it is. 3.1 through 3.2 or 3 actually. We're going to talk about populations. So let's start by 3.1. Generalist versus a specialist. Just so you know where we are, again, what I was going to be mentioning, biomes refers to the ecosystem level. We talked about ecological successions and we are here in populations. We already talked about diversity for individuals, so let's focus on populations right now. So populations, usually they are dynamic. So everything we study for them is not going to be in the individual level. And the ways that we can study these is by knowing their size, their density, and distribution. So just so you know some little definitions, the density would be the number of organisms per unit area, and the distribution would be where those organisms are located. Okay, so these are some maps that will show you the distribution of population by latitude and longitude. As you can see, these different variations over here or gradients will show you that. This is another map by the National Geographic that shows not only the distribution of population, but also by the income in the different places. And again, the density of population will be by the strongest the color that it has, the number of pixels. Okay, but also the National Geographic has other factors being studied that are affecting populations. We're gonna take a look at some of these factors in the later videos. Okay, now what is density? It's similar to what you learned in chemistry in the past. In this case, instead of mass, we're gonna have the number of individuals per unit area or per unit volume if we're talking about ocean masses, right? These are the units that we'll usually use to represent the density. And then I want to touch on the topic of dispersion in a little bit, which is going to be how we have those individuals spaced out in a specific area. And that will establish some boundaries for that population. Again, here you have another little look for what the world population looks like from the point of National Geographic and the estimation or the estimate that they have for world population by 2050. Okay, this is another map that is going to show population density per square kilometer. So as you can see, we are not evenly distributed on the Earth. And also, Facebook even uses artificial intelligence to map the population density. They are working on this and they have done a lot in the last few years, especially in the Africa area. Okay, I would like you to go to the actual Google slide from Drive that is also posted on campus, and go to this website over here. And it's an interactive website in which you're gonna see the density of the population and compare it to previous years, compare it to different cities of the world. It's a very, very nice website. I would really recommend that you use it. Okay, so going back to density, usually density is gonna be determined by factors that we'll see later, but this density is gonna be determined by factors like the number of birds and the number of births and immigration, and the number of deaths and immigration. So that's gonna determine the population in an area. This is the 2019 data for population density. Again, here, the region of Macau in China, even though it's not the whole country, but it's being used as an independent region that determines the highest population density in the world. Yeah, so that is the map over here. And also by a state, if we talked about the United States by 2019, these are the top 10 densest states. But this graph over here is from 2018, so these numbers are gonna not be represented the same, because I couldn't find the graph for 2018. Anyway, so this is the population density by state. Some of the possible calculations that you would have to do are something like the ones we have for this example. Like in the past, because you were not supposed to use calculators, they would give you whole numbers. Like the population in LA would be 4 million people. And then the area in LA would be 1,300 square kilometers. And now they will give you a specific number and they would ask you something like, what is the population density of LA? Now, because you're going to use calculators, we were told that you're going to be given a specific numbers or real numbers. And of course, they would pick places that are very or highly populated. and they will tell you, okay, calculate the population density. So if you could add this answer to your notes, that would be great. This is the information from 2019 data for LA. Okay. So the next one, it's another cool website that you gotta check. So make sure you go to Gapminder. Gapminder is an interactive map or table or graph. It has everything, in which you can see the different countries represented with a bubble and with a different color depending on the type of region or the continent where they are. So we see that this is the United States. If you go to the website, you're gonna be able to see how the population has changed. You can change the different factors that affect population, like income level, age structure, and all of those. And you can play around a little bit with the setup of what do you want to observe. You can observe a specific country only through the different number of years or through the years. And you can compare 2 or 3 countries and how they have changed in the last 10 years. So I would really encourage you to go to this Gapminder website and make sure you play a little bit with this. Okay, factors that are again that are going to affect the population or that regulate the population distribution are going to be the size and the density. Okay, and you need to know the difference between this. We're going to talk about the factors later. We already talked about density. Okay, now switching a little bit to the type of species in the population. We have some populations that are conformed by generalist species, which I'm sure you've heard them in your biology class before. These species are usually, they have a broad niche, they can live in different habitats, they adapt very easily. If there is an environmental change, they can tolerate that. These are some examples that you can find. And some of these generalist species actually become the invasive species we've been talking about. Okay, specialist species, on the other hand, they have narrow niche. So they're gonna be very specialized in the type of resource or the type of habitat that they're gonna be. And if there is an environmental change, they're likely to go extinct. Some examples of those species over here. And just reminding you, if we're talking about generalist and specialist species, I would like you to refer back to what was a niche, right? And what was a realized niche, and how the niche of generalists are going to be wide because they can adapt, and the specialist niche is going to be very narrow. If you remember this graph, hopefully that will help you to differentiate between the niche of a generalist and a niche of a specialist. Okay, now this is not exactly how it works in the real biosphere, because we're going to have that some organisms are not generalists and they are not specialists. They are in the middle. There is like a gradient. Some of these organisms also change when environmental conditions change. So some of them are generalists during a certain season or under specific environmental conditions, and they can switch to a more specialist side if the environmental conditions change. So again, this is going to be a gradient. These are some examples of organisms that are considered either or in the middle. And this is again a table that will show you their characteristics. But if we talked about competition, because the specialist species are going to be very highly specific to their niche, they should outcompete the generalist under ideal conditions, right? Because they know how to get their food, they know how to survive in that specific habitat. But if environmental condition changes, they are in trouble. And then the generalists start taking over. But again, by definition, a specialist will outcompete the generalist. Okay, remember I mentioned the patterns of dispersion? Well, the patterns of dispersion are going to be of 3 different types over here represented, and the environmental and social factors were going to play a very important role in how these populations are spaced out. Okay, so let's talk about each one. The first one is the clump dispersion, and it's influenced by the resource availability and behavior. We have 2 main examples here, and these are the diagrams that show the representation of how a clump dispersion look like. Usually it's going to be a group of species in one area because of abiotic factors available, resources available, or because the habitat that they need to survive, right? Or maybe because they need to be clumped to hunt. Okay, Uniform dispersion is going to be influenced by social interaction. Usually we see this in penguins. We also see this in cacti. They're going to be evenly distributed. So this is called uniform dispersion. And then we have random dispersion. That is going to be the position just independently from each other. They just kind of land wherever they can, and they grow. There is no like a pattern that you're going to be observing. So like dandelions or spiders, they're going to be just randomly dispersed on their habitat. Okay, 3.2, K-selected versus R-selected. So we're going to talk about these two. I'm pretty sure you already have an idea. So here we go. There is a chart that shows you their specific characteristics, and I'm not going to go over every single one, but you are welcome to pause the video and remember their main characteristics. Remember, they are highly specialized on, or they're usually formed by K-selected. They're going to be able to compete, like I mentioned, right? They have a high parental care and a later reproductive age. So they are not going to get offspring at an early age, opposite to R-selected. So these are some examples of the K-selected species, and these are some examples of the R-selected species, right? They reproduce in large numbers. Doesn't mean that everybody makes it to adulthood, but they have that capability. So if we looked at these two type of species in a growth curve, we're going to see different. So the difference would be that our selected species are going to overshoot their carrying capacity. They can pass it. They can totally have this population overgrown. And then suddenly they can all die, and they can all the way come back up the next season or the next year. So they are very random at how they can just overshoot their carrying capacity. Now, the K-selected species, on the other hand, are going to reach their carrying capacity, and they will become stable at that point. Okay. Now, we also need to know what is biotic potential. The biotic potential is going to be represented by the maximum reproductive rate of a population in ideal conditions. That means if there is no environmental pressure, or if there are no predators, or if everything is perfect, that organism, how many offspring can it have? Or what is the oldest age it can live, right? If everything would happen perfectly. So if that is true, then we would have that the R-selected species will have a higher biotic potential than the K-selected species. Okay, so make sure you remember that. Now, if we show the growing of a biotic potential, we would see that a population would just grow perfectly over like to any number, to its maximum number with non-stop. That's called exponential growth. There will be no carrying capacity here. They will continue growing because there's nothing that limits that population. However, you know that that's not true because there is environmental resistance. And this environmental resistance will make the population have a different growth right, different than the exponential growth, and just call this logistic growth, right? So they're gonna reach that carrying capacity and just kind of stabilize themselves there. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, not everything is R-selected or K-selected, and many species are going to change their reproductive strategies depending the conditions that there are in the environment. Okay. Also, the K-selected are going to be more affected by invasive species than R-selected, and also the invasive species are going to be mostly R-selected. These are some examples of R-selected species that can become invasive. Okay, we also have an example here, right, that we can see here in San Diego or in California, in some areas of California. So yeah, that was 3.2. 3.3, the last one, survivorship curves. So you've seen this already, and what these curves are representing are the survival rates for a group, right? Not for individuals, for a population, for a cohort. So this line will display, right, that group at a specific time and at the same age sometimes, right? And how that is going to be affecting their numbers throughout the years, right, throughout the age. So we have three types of curves. Type 1 is going to be for mammals, for humans, as you can see. And the type 1 is going to have a low death rate. That means that many of the individuals are going to reach the older ages. Now, type 2, it has a moderate death rate, and the individuals that die can die at any point in life. And then we have that type 3 have a very high death rate. So most of the offspring are going to die at an early age, and they won't make it to the later stages of life, even though they are able to. Okay, now if we join those survivorship curves with the K-selected, R-selected, of course, K-selected would be represented in a type 1 line, and R-selected would be a type 3. But again, many species will be in the middle because, as we saw, some species or many of the species are not necessarily K-selected or R-selected. Okay, we also need to know what life tables are and what is their importance. What do they show us? They are called life tables, but the use of a life table is for calculating the mortality of a population. The way that they do that is they put the population, the number of individuals per age, and then they will calculate how many what's the survival or the number of surviving individuals, and what would be their mortality rate. So we're going to have a lab in which you're going to get to calculate that. Okay, so those are the life tables. Not tomorrow, but hopefully later this week we'll have one of those labs. Okay, another example of a life table, this is for squirrels. And if you can see, once you have the life table, you can also create the survivorship curves from that population. Okay, if you want to pause the video, this chart will show you the characteristics for the 3 types of curves. If you want to take a look to make sure you understand it. One last one is just a life table for the doll ships, right? So one more time, if you have data that will tell you the survival rate for that population, you should be able to calculate a survivorship curve. Again, we're going to create those with specific examples. Okay, that's it for this part, 3.1 to 3.3.